Hello, good morning. Hi, good morning. Welcome to this week's Learn with Lorna episode 153. Every week that I say that, I'm always completely astonished. My name is Lorna Steele-McGinn. I'm the Community Engagement Officer with the Highland Archive Service. As you'll know if you have watched previously, the Highland Archive Service has 4 archive centres across the north of Scotland, one in Inverness, one in Fort William, one in Portree and one in Wick. And this series is designed to tell some of the stories from the amazing collections we hold across those 4 offices. They go back to the 1200s through to the present day, so many stories I could and do try to share with you. This series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland. There's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of events, watching these talks. But if you are able to donate towards our work and help us continue to do the range of activities that we do, then we'd be very, very grateful for any donations. There's a link to be able to donate in the body of the text, whether you're watching on Facebook or whether you're watching on YouTube. So yeah, welcome to episode 153. Last week, you may remember we looked at one particular collection, the Munro of Navarre papers, one family, one estate, largely, and very kind of focused on that one collection. So today, instead, I'm doing something different. I'm looking across collections to find some stories from Nairn. So to locate us, for anyone who doesn't know, Nairn is a town about 17 miles east of Inverness on the Moray Firth coast. The town of Nairn, which was a borough, which I'll come back to, it sits within the parish of Nairn and the county of Nairnshire. It's a settlement with a very long history, becoming over the centuries first of all a royal borough and then a popular health and holiday resort, and a centre for arts, music and sport. So a place with a lot of interesting connections. Hi everyone. Hi Anne, Jen, seeing all your names coming up. Thank you for saying hello. I do appreciate it. Just feel like I'm not speaking into the ether. So I wanted to start with a summary of Nairn's history taken from our Borough of Nairn catalogue. So this is how we have described it when we've been summarising the borough records. The settlement and seaport of Invernairn in the parish of Nairn was erected a royal borough by William the Lion, so he is 1165 to 1214. A charter of Alexander II, dated between 1215 and 1226, notes that William had set aside lands for a castle and borough of Invernairn. The borough was still normally known as Invernairn more than 100 years after its foundation, but after the reign of Robert I, the shortened form Nairn came to be preferred. By grant of Robert I in 1312, Nairn passed into the hands of the Earls of Moray, perhaps remaining under their superiority until the forfeiture of the Douglas Earl of Moray in 1455. Later on, it was held by the Earl of Ross, but Nairn appears to have reverted to the Crown with confiscation of the earldom in 1475. It may have recovered its status as a royal borough soon afterwards, although there is no sign that it was represented in Parliament before 1567. In 1589, a charter of James VI confirmed Nairn's re-erection as a royal borough. Fishing, and especially herring fishing, was the town's main industry. By 1841, its population had reached 2,318, and in the following year it became a police borough under the Borough Police Scotland Act 1833. Nairn's householders rejected part of the Police of Towns Scotland Act, but it did go on to adopt the whole of the General Police and Improvement Scotland Act, being governed thereafter by 17 town councillors also serving as police commissioners. It goes on to say that in 1930, Nairn became a small borough under the terms of the Local Government Scotland Act and retained that status until 1975, when the Town Council was abolished in accordance with the terms of the Local Government Scotland Act, when all boroughs were abolished. and the council's powers were assumed by the Highland Regional Council and Nairn District Council. So a whistle-stop tour there through hundreds of years, but it probably gives you something of an oversight into the typical story of a Scottish borough. So it's been formed in the 1100s, as many were. It has been kind of battered by politics, by forfeiture, by favour, by earldoms, by religion, eventually becoming a police borough, and then ending the borough system in 1975. So like I say, quite a standard type of story for a borough. Our Borough of Nairn collection dates from 1657 onwards, and that was an obvious place for me to go to start looking for stories of things that have happened in the town. The Nairn Borough records include registers of deeds, cartularies, Dean of Guild planning records, licensing records, accounts, and of course the much loved valuation rolls. And if anyone has traced a history of a building or a family in Scotland, then they have probably used valuation rolls which detail the owner and tenant and occupier of every inhabited property annually from the 1860s onwards. Yes, Jen, I'm seeing your question. Yes, it's across the firth from Cromarty. So if you remember Malcolm Blaine's diaries, which I know you were fond of, he went from Nairn directly across to Cromarty, but on a boat, obviously. So all of those records can be found within our borough collection, but my go-to place in any borough collection is always the minute books, because the minute books are where the discussions of the town council are recorded and where any decisions are made. So when I went to look in the borough minutes for Nairn, example I have possibly referenced before, but it's an interesting one. In 1714, the town council met in response to a letter received from the Lords of Justiciary and Exchequer. The Lords had sent a letter saying that Queen Anne was ill. She had actually died by the time that they met, and that there was going to inevitably be political and social upheaval as those supporting the Jacobite claim to the throne would see an opportunity to put her half-brother James on the throne. Incidentally, Queen Anne had had 17 pregnancies, but none of her children had survived into adulthood. And it might seem that those events were playing out in London, it's far away, and it would have very little impact on somewhere like Nairn. But we can see that the impact of things like that was being felt in Nairn. So the following year, the town council met and recorded this extract. The council has been informed of the countries being troubled by the insulting of Highlanders and others, and there are fears that this place may be assaulted. We have appointed the guard to be punctually kept by all the respective guards under the highest peril. An intimation is to be made thereof this day by the officer, and one of the guards is to be sent express to Kilrock for further intelligence, and to learn if the Highlanders that have infested Inverness are likely to come further east, and what accounts he can gather of them. As I say, I've possibly mentioned it before because it's such a sort of incendiary bit of wording about the Highlanders infesting Inverness. So by going into borough minutes, you can find all sorts of local information about national events. So we can see that these big issues happening across the continent and across, like I say, playing out largely in London and Parliament, that's having ramifications in Nairn. If we go forward 200 years and move from the borough council to the county council, so this is the borough is running the town, the county council is running Nairnshire. So if we move to the county council minutes to have a look, we can see again how a national and international event had an impact on this relatively small place in the north of Scotland. So this is an extract from the county council minutes. It was explained that this meeting had been called on short notice and a week earlier than usual in case of the 4th Battalion Cameron Highlanders being mobilised in consequence of the war with Germany, and the road surveyor, as an officer in the Nairnshire Company, has been called out. It was further explained that the order for mobilisation had been issued and that the surveyor could not be present. So just as we saw the Jacobite risings having an impact in Nairn, we can move forward 200 years and see the impact of a global conflict. they're meeting to discuss the impact. That meeting was on the 6th of August 1914. So they're already calling an extraordinary meeting to note that something is about to change and that they're concerned about the impact on the borough. After agreeing their way forward and what they were going to do in this situation, with the fact that the surveyor has been called up, they note their good wishes for him in the borough minutes, in the county council minutes. So they're saying, we recognise he has to go and we send all our best wishes for his safe return. And that is something that we see replicated in minutes of county councils, boroughs, churches, clubs, societies, everything right across the country. At moments like this, we see this recognition of people going and a prayer and hope for their safe return. In the school records for Nairn, we can see impacts of the First and the Second World War, but perhaps a little bit more surprisingly, some earlier conflicts. So I'm entirely used to seeing references to the First World War and the Second World War and the impact that has on staffing, on teachers, on janitors, on pupils. This one's a little bit more unusual. So this is an extract written from June 1914. Monday was a public holiday, Wednesday being the sexcentenary of the Battle of Bannockburn. The members of the school board addressed the children and gave them a half holiday. So there you go, it's not just contemporary wars that are having an impact. You can see the children getting a half holiday for the 600th anniversary of the Battle of Bannockburn. Really interesting. I don't think I've ever seen that in any other school logbook, so I don't know why Nairn was particularly invested in that. That was from Millbank School, who were, when they wrote that in June 1914, like everybody else, about to be plunged into another war. And from 1914 to 1918, we see a range of war-related extracts in the school logbooks, including this one from 1917. February the 23rd, 1917. Attendance poor on the whole. Staff all present throughout the week and work proceeded as usual. We began digging the garden ground, manured with farmyard and artificials, to start planting potatoes. March the 2nd, attendance poor in several classes. Staff present all week except that on Friday, Miss Robertson was absent owing to her mother's illness. The weather being suitable for the digging of the garden, the plots have made good progress, and a collection for the work of the Salvation Army realised £1.7 and 10. So again, you can see the fact that they're turning over the school gardens to use them for planting of potatoes, and that they're raising money for the war effort. So that's First World War, but you can also see extracts in World War II are particularly fascinating, because again it shows not just the personal ramifications of the war on the town, not just the loss that those individuals are feeling, like the county council recording the surveyor going off, but also the upheaval that the war brought. So if you haven't listened to this one, this is from the start, or just before the start of the Second World War. So July the 7th, 1939. The school closed on Wednesday the 5th for the summer vacation, when prizes for schoolwork and sports were presented by Mrs. D. Fraser Woodville. The chairman of the Murray and Nairn Education Committee, Reverend Mr. William of Aldfern, presided. And it was the occasion for the presentation to the headmaster on his retirement of the gifts from former pupils and friends and pupils. So it's the end of term, the head teacher is retiring. They say that because it was a presentation to the headmaster, because he was leaving, there was a larger interest than usual of parents and others who all came along to attend. Colonel Bailey, CMG, made the presentation on behalf of former pupils, and Douglas Fraser on behalf of current pupils. An address was given, and the new headmaster, Lieutenant Colonel Berwick, was introduced and suitably replied. So that's in July. You can see the headmaster retiring and the new headmaster, Lieutenant Colonel Berwick, taking his place. But on the 15th of September, owing to the outbreak of war between Germany and the British Empire and France, the opening of the schools was delayed from the 5th to the 11th. Lieutenant Colonel Berwick having mobilised with his battalion the 7th Seaforth Highlanders, he was unable to take up duty as headmaster of this school. Under the circumstances, the retiring headmaster was asked by the Education Committee to carry on as temporary headmaster. It goes on to say that as Nairn is considered a safe area, considerable numbers of children have been sent here by their parents. Only 2 official evacuees under the government scheme have so far been admitted. But the general feeling of upheaval can be seen through this next paragraph. So, Miss Garvin was appointed here in room of Miss Patterson, who has had to remain at Cawdor Primary School to carry on in the absence on service of their headmaster, Captain Cairns. Miss Anne Barron of Nairn has joined the staff in her place. Miss Jean MacDonald and Miss Taylor have been taken into duty, and all the other staff remain the same. The main hall has been blackened out and the lamps will be lit all day. So you just really get a sense of, aside from the emotional impact, aside from knowing that people are going off to fight and you're losing them, there's this sense of just absolute mayhem as teachers go. They have to call back retired teachers, they have to move people about to try and ensure that things are covered. And that's just Millbank School in Nairn. We have records for Nairn Academy, Rose's Academical Institution, the Sessional School and others. And so we can find out about life in the town as a whole through the records of the Highland Council and the Nairn Borough Council and the Nairn County Council. So we can find out what things that were impacting that whole community. But as you will know, we don't just hold the records of the Highland Council, we also hold private collections, papers of societies and individuals and groups and others, such as the Dr. Grigger papers, which I've spoken about before. So I'm not going to go into Dr. Grigger today, even though he's such a huge part of Nairn's history. If you're interested in finding out about him, please do go and watch that dedicated episode to Dr. Grigger. So what private papers do we hold that can shed light on life in Nairn over the generations? Well, as I mentioned right at the beginning, Nairn sits on the coast, and this has been central to the town's identity, from the fishing industry through to it being a health resort on the coast. And so, of course, fishing has always been a key part of the town's story, but a hard part, as any fishing community will be familiar with. It is at times a very rewarding role, and a rewarding industry, and at times a hugely demanding industry with many lives lost. One of the privately deposited collections that we hold at the Highland Archive Centre that sheds light particularly on the importance of fishing to this community is D124, the records of the Nairn Fishermen's Society. And let me share with you from that collection some extracts that talk about the history of the society and why it came about and when. This society was begun in 1767 when 57 men, heads of families, signed their agreement to pay 2 and 6 annually into a common fund to be used to help widows, old people and fishermen fallen on evil times through scarcity, illness or disaster. There is no mention of orphans in the initial planning of the society, so presumably these were assumed to be cared for by relatives. I have not heard of any other society in Scotland like this that is still in existence. The Constitution states most definitely that this society is for the good of the fishing community in the town. Membership was confined to men engaged in fishing or their widows, each paying their 2 and 6 in the form of quarter pennies, a 1 and 6 after the summer season's fishing, and 6pence at other times. If a member died, his widow was freed from paying until her eldest son was of an age to go to sea in his father's place. The third article of the original agreement is noteworthy since it shows the Society's concern for the moral good of the community. It states that if a member be adjudged troublesome by a majority vote, he would be fined for his first 3 offences, up to a maximum of 10 shillings, and if he transgresses a 4th time, he should be expelled from the society. There is, however, no recorded expulsion. A committee, originally called the Managers of the Box, were appointed to run the Fishermen's Society under the guidance of a Presses, chosen from among the patriarchs of the community. He was chosen for life, and he always opened the meeting with prayer. The meetings were first held in the Press's house, but after 1888 in the Seamen's Hall. It describes, so you get the sense of that description of what the society was for. It's there to support widows, it's there to support fishermen who are struggling for any reason. And this history of the society that's part of the collection says, in all their surviving records, the society pay practically no attention to anything noteworthy in the way of weather or calamity on shore or at sea. Perhaps they were so commonplace to be unworthy of special mention. But one thing compelled them to attention. It was in 1832, and I quote, "From January the 3rd to April the 2nd, there was never such weather seen or known in the memory of man. Such uncommon high winds, all the wind all the time blowing from the southwest to the northwest. There was not a cod or a haddock killed, nor yet a boat of any sort of fishing during those 3 months. Consider the state of this fishing community at the end of those 3 months." Another source of income to the society was the mort cloth. And again, this a mort cloth. I don't know if I've spoken about the mort cloth before, but it's something that we see in many, many records. So let me read you about the mort cloth that the Fishermen's Society had. Another source of income to the society was the mort cloth, a pall or cloth used to cover a coffin while being borne on men's shoulders to the graveyard. It was made for the society in 1769 by Hugh Faulkner, merchant in Nairn, at the then enormous cost of £16 1 and 9 pence. It was hired out at a fixed scale of charges: members 1 shilling, friends, except i.e. relatives, etc., 2 and 6, others in the town 3 shillings. It was also lent outside the town, i.e. to Delneys, but the committee decided it was not to go beyond Auldearn or Geddes. And as I say, it's something that you may well be familiar with, but it's something that we come across a lot in the Borough records, that the community would have a mort cloth that would cover a coffin, and it would be rented out by the Borough or by the church or by whoever was in control of it. The Fishermen's Society in 1771 purchased land in Nairn where fishermen could build. Fisherton and the Society Street are still there in Nairn, named after the Fishermen's Society. And we have various records from this society, including, so I think there's some minute books that are the various records of the society. So that gives you some insight into the borough, into the county, into the industry. But church records too can give us an insight into Nairn's past. We hold Church of Scotland records for Nairn Old, Nairn Old Church from 1812 to 1942, and for Nairn Presbytery from 1773 to 1929. We have some from Nairn Free Church from its foundation in 1843, and Nairn United Presbyterian from 1872. And in addition to this, and quite unusually, we also hold the records for Nairn Congregational Church, which we, as I say, that doesn't come through the Church of Scotland system of records. That comes to us through a private deposit. As I've said on many occasions before, a browse through church records is always sure to yield stories, largely about fornication, but I've gone for something different for this one. Nairn is absolutely no exception to that rule about church records, so have a listen to these two that I have selected. Nairn, 15th of October 1838. The session having met and being constituted with prayer. So it lists who's there, the minister and the elders. A petition was given into the session by Peter Fraser, pensioner, praying that the session would grant relief for the support of a child of his son's who left the country lately in a clandestine manner, and the said child is now left unprovided for. So this is a common reason that people will approach the session, is to say, could you please give us some financial or practical support? So the session, having taken this matter into their consideration, were unanimously of the opinion that it having come to their knowledge that he assisted his son in leaving the country in a clandestine manner, refused to grant any relief under existing circumstances, and instruct the clerk to intimate such to him. So they're not going to help him because he was complicit in the clandestine leaving of his son. This is another extract from 1840. At Nairn on the 25th day of November, the session having met and being constituted with prayer, they have been informed that certain parties, while watching a grave some night during the preceding week, had come into the parish church by opening one of the windows and had spoiled some of the seats with candle grease and other nuisances. So having heard this report, they caused the suspected persons, 3 men named William Main, to be summoned before them this day. The said parties accordingly appeared and confessed their guilt, whereupon the session, considering that it was their first offence and that they had expressed penitence, dismissed them with a suitable admonition and warning as to their future behaviour. So anyone who thinks that people breaking into churches and causing hassle is new, it's absolutely not. But interesting there, just that reference to them, they're watching the grave overnight. And that's 1840, so that could be to do with grave robbers. It could be a mark of respect. But also that the 3 men were called William Main. So Main is a very common name in and around the area, and so many fishermen of the same surname that we can see them frequently going by names. So you can see this in the valuation rolls as well, that they would have almost like a nickname, a by name or T name that would distinguish them from each other. So we always see that in church records, the role of the church in administering discipline. But of course, wrongdoers also face the discipline of the justice system, and so we can find stories from Nairn in our court papers as well. This is an extract from 1796. So it says that James Mackintosh, mason in Nairn, within the county of Nairn, Mary MacPhail, resident there, Janet Wilson, daughter of James Wilson, vintner there, and Margaret Morrison, resident there, so they're the accused, come stand accused at the instance of the Crown of the crime of being concerned in a riotous mob in the town of Nairn in the month of March last, in the manner mentioned in the libel. In respect of the verdict returned against the panel, Lord Craig ordained and hereby ordains that the said James Mackintosh, Mary MacPhail, Janet Wilson and Margaret Morrison be imprisoned in the Tolbooth of Inverness for the space of 3 months from this date, and then to be set at liberty upon their finding caution. They are then also, so not only are they put in prison for 3 months, but they're bound over to keep the peace for the space of a year afterwards, on the penalty of 200 merks, Scots merks each. So if they were to cause further trouble, then they could expect a hefty fine. But I'm keen to say, and if anyone's watching who lives in Nairn, I'm keen to say there is not all stories of crime, punishment and people breaking into churches and things. There are some wonderful references in our collections to Nairn as a place for sport, for leisure, for relaxation, for health, so much of which stems from the work of Dr. John Grigger, as I've mentioned. Please do go and have a look at episode 137 if you want to find more about that. But we hold other records that detail this. So we hold guidebooks for Nairn from the 1930s, which advertise businesses including the Nairn Gaslight Company, which apparently makes washing up child's play. These guidebooks also include references, information about the golf links, about the sea water baths, and details of all the major local events from the famous Nairn Games, first started in the 1860s, and by the 1930s, when the guidebook was published, the Nairn Games was attracting around 16,000 spectators. And we hold papers relating to the Nairn Games as well, from minute books to programmes over the decades. So all sorts of memories for people as well that can be found in those records. So that guidebook, like I say, talks about the games, but it also mentions the Nairn sea baths. And sea bathing has always been a really big part of Nairn life, and still, if anyone else like me is watching who grew up in and around this area, the place is mobbed on a sunny day. If it's a sunny day, you either go to Wynn Park and play in the park, or you go to Nairn Beach. It's just what you do. I hope someone will now back me up and say they grew up and they went to Nairn Beach when it was sunny. So it's always been a part of the place's story. And we find this reference in our collections. So for instance, There's a letter from the 23rd of August 1821 in which Alexander Mackintosh of Nairn writes to Mrs. Bailey to say that the Nairn baths have now been opened and they're in popular use. And that same collection, the Bailey collection, references attendances at the Nairn Ball. So we have all this evidence of Nairn as a place, a fashionable and a high society place to be. It's fashionable, there's society are there, there's social events. It was commonly called the Brighton of the North, as I'm sure you will have heard. But I wanted to close this episode by sharing another extract from that 1930s guidebook, the opening paragraph of entitled A Stroll Around the Town. And honestly, if this doesn't make you want to visit Nairn, nothing will. I mean, this is advertising on steroids. As the visitor approaches Nairn, either by road or rail, he cannot fail to be impressed by its ideal situation and the beauty of its surroundings, thereby engendering a love for the town which increases as closer association is made with it. Nairn appeals to those with an artistic temperament through its clean and inviting aspect. It attracts the antiquary by the historic associations of its neighbourhood, and offers unrivalled facilities to golfers and others of the sporting fraternity. There is no limit to the eulogy which might fittingly be bestowed upon Nairn, but that is out with the scope of this sketch, the object of which is to accompany the visitor on a stroll around the town, noting the principal places of interest en route. Let us suppose, then, that the visitor has arrived by rail and, making only a short stay, is desirous of seeing as much as he can. It is a glorious day in midsummer, with the sun blazing down from an almost cloudless sky, typical, indeed, of the weather visitors may confidently expect at Nairn, which can boast having 40 days more summer than any other place in Scotland, if sunshine be the test of summer. And so it goes on. Like I say, surely that was responsible for people flocking here in large numbers with the guaranteed sunshine. I'm going to stop talking there, but I hope that you have enjoyed that and you found that interesting. Like any town, or particularly one that's been a borough, you can delve into a whole range of stories covering the good, the bad and the ugly, essentially. And I've got some more coming up where I'm going to look at Dingwall and Dornoch and some other areas. So we'll have a similar look at what we can find out about those towns. But I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode, and you can join me next week. Next week we will be looking at links with America. So where do we find in our collections any links to America, good or bad? That one will be pre-recorded because I'm delivering a workshop down at the Highland Folk Museum, so if anyone is able to come along to that, then please do book on. But the Learn with Lorna will be pre-recorded next week, so I know that makes it a little bit trickier to find. You need to go and search our Facebook page and find it in our Facebook feed. But please do that, and I will pick up any comments and chat later on. But I hope you've enjoyed this week. And a reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of events. But as I always say, and I'm conscious that I do say it repeatedly, but if you're able to donate towards our work, then we are incredibly grateful for that. Thank you.